welcome to We Watch Bad Films, the podcast where we watch bad films so you don't have to. Available on Spotify, iTunes, and all those other things. You probably already know that because you're listening to it already. I'm Gary, and joining me this week is Jay.
Hello.
Oh, that was a bit vibrant. Good to hear from you. How you doing, Jay?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Gary?
Yes, not bad, not bad. I'm currently sipping on an orange tango, as all the cool kids do. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking some sherry.
Sherry and orange tango. If that doesn't tell you more about us than you need to know, I don't know what will. Before we look at watch a film that I had in mind this week, I thought we would look at a particular topic of a director. A few episodes ago, I think it was episode 12, when we covered the execrable Alone in the Dark. I asked you the question, and we talked about bad films made by good directors. And we mentioned, I believe, Ridley Scott. We talked about James Cameron. I want to look at someone who is in that generation of filmmakers who is a contemporary of them, and that's George Lucas. George Lucas, I wanted to pick on particularly. He has a particular resonance for us as people who know each other. I don't think it's too far to say that a good deal of our friendship many, many, many years ago, listeners, was based on a mutual appreciation for Star Wars.
Yeah.
But George Lucas himself is an interesting character. Born in California, 1944. He always wanted to be a racing car driver, a drag car driver, and had a bad accident as a teenager that changed the course of his life and completely changed his outlook on life. And in fact, I've always argued you can see elements of him going through that in his work. His films, I think, are best described as spotty. When he hits it big, he hits it really big. But a lot of the time, he does flounder.
It's funny that you say that George Lucas a lot of the time flounders, because actually he has his fingers in some of the biggest intellectual properties in cinema ever. I mean, he's one of the most successful filmmakers of all time, but actually, I agree with you. A lot of the films he makes are a bit iffy, spotty, to use your vernacular. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he has a producer credit on many, many, many films. Of course, his long-standing friendship come rivalry with Spielberg has his executive producer credit all over the place. And of course, it was the making of Star Wars in the mid-70s that really the obvious, put his name on the map, but also turned him off from making another film for many, many years.
And also, just to add there, he is one of the most successful independent filmmakers of all time. He never was part of any studio system. He created his own studio.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted to go outside of the studio system again as a rebellion of what happened during New Hope, no pun intended. During the making of it, of the original Star Wars film, felt a little bit screwed over, a little bit hamstrung by what the studios wanted out of him. But equally, I think he's of a generation where we can do it ourselves, and his contemporaries are, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, very much people in his class, as it were.
Yeah, almost literally, because they went to film school together.
They did indeed, and I think entered similar challenges together. But that comes down to his film. So after he does New Hope, famously, it causes him so much stress, he decides to bow out of directing the sequel, Empire Strikes Back, if you didn't know. Sort of hands the reins over, quite surprisingly, to Irving Kershner, quite a workmanlike but decent filmmaker.
Who was his tutor at film school, right?
Who was his tutor at film school. An odd choice. You turn back to your old teacher and say, do you mind directing this film for me, which is probably the most anticipated sequel of all time?
Yeah, well, you would hope that your tutor would know a fair bit about filmmaking.
Well, I guess there is that, isn't there? And arguably the best of all Star Wars films, Empire Strikes Back. And yet George Lucas is not behind the camera, an odd one. In fact, it puts him away from filmmaking for 20 years. It's not until 1999 with the release of, hey, it's Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Which I heard he wasn't going to direct that either, and he sort of he ended up having to because nobody else would. That's what I heard.
I believe that's true as well. I think the weight of expectation, as we just said, after leaving Star Wars alone for, at that point, about 15, 16 years, how do you do that? How do you follow that? And I believe it was him thinking, oh, let's have a go at these special editions, that reignited his love of filmmaking again when he realised what was possible through CGI. A separate conversation for a minute, I think. What's your opinion on Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, Jay?
Oh dear. We're going in heavy from the beginning. Okay. A complex is the word that springs to mind. My feelings towards it are complex. Initially, I was so excited, as I think probably a third of planet Earth were.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was consumed by the initial excitement whilst I was watching it and thought it was great. However, that sort of diminished quite rapidly on subsequent viewings. And there are parts of Episode 1 that Episode 1 is flawed, but actually I do actually enjoy it. That's what I'm going to say. I do actually enjoy it, knowing that it's flawed, knowing that it doesn't compare to the original trilogy. So that's what I want to get across here. I do enjoy it. However, there are some decisions that he made in that storytelling, not just the filmmaking, that are almost unforgivable. So it's a very complex feeling I have towards Phantom Menace. How about you?
I understand, because I feel the same. I think the lows in Episode 1 are very low, but the highs are really high. So you're constantly bouncing between boring racist stuff about Nemoidians, and Ewan McGregor just being cool, and then lots of stuff about taxation and trade routes, and then Darth Maul. And so there's all this bouncing around. When Star Wars Episode 1, A Phantom Menace, was released, I was working in a cinema at the time, and I knew when to walk into the screening to do a little check when my favourite bits were on. So I will always go in for the pod racing scenes and the Darth Maul climactic lightsaber duel.
Yes, I can see that. I will say, back in them days, excluding you because you worked in a cinema, back in them days, unless you saw it at the cinema, then the only other way that you'd be seeing it is at home on TVs. And this is a long time ago now, and not many people even had DVDs, let alone Blu-ray, surround system, huge flat screen TVs. Most people that I knew watched The Phantom Menace initially on VHS on a terribly small TV screen. Now, I'm saying that because about a year or so ago, I watched The Phantom Menace with my ex-housemate who had never seen any Star Wars films. Yeah. People like that do.
And you've started him in chronological order, like in story order,
because he wanted to watch it in story order, because we had just the Game of Thrones epic, and he wanted to watch something with a long story. And I told him it's not going to be quite the same in tone or complexity, but he wanted to watch.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, but I will say that when I was watching it we watched it on a massive screen projected, coming out of a huge PA system. And my word, it certainly does elevate the film. And so I think a tiny percentage of my disappointment of that film initially was also because it doesn't work on a home system. If you're watching it on a massive screen with a huge sound system, then those pod race bits, the fights, the space battles, the music, the costumes, the vision, the whole experience is elevated, and I actually really enjoyed it.
Well, that's interesting. So I've hinted already that we were huge Star Wars fans throughout the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, a little bit, just a little
school
bit
together. just a little bit. We would watch them a lot together. So we've got 20 years of expectation, anticipation, thoughts, knowledge of backstory and books and behind the scenes as we start to watch The Phantom Menace, which is a whole layer, a whole lens over the whole project. But what did your friend think as a newbie? I mean, no one's newbie to Star Wars. You know what Yoda is, you know what Darth Vader is. Oh, it's his dad, and all that stuff. What did your friend think?
He really enjoyed it. And actually, he doesn't know who Yoda is, and he doesn't know who Anakin
Okay.
and Darth Vader is. And so there are people like this who exist, and so it's actually quite interesting to watch it with someone like that. But he quite enjoyed it because of the spectacle. And actually, if I'm going to be really objective here, there aren't many films that look and sound like the Star Wars prequel trilogy. They
It sounds a bit damning with faint praise.
Oh dear, yeah. I don't mean it to. I'm trying to I'm trying to big it up because there are deep flaws, but it is actually quite a spectacle. And if you're not if you're not basically a huge Star Wars geek like you and I are, then it doesn't really matter that Darth Vader made C-3PO. Who cares, really? But obviously we care, and that is an unforgivable thing that George Lucas did, and I never ever get over it.
So I think ranty film people, and we're not really one of those people, when they complain about Phantom Menace, say that the things wrong with it are looking at Vader as a boy is neither interesting nor is Jake Lloyd a good actor. I don't have any problem with seeing Anakin Skywalker as a 10-year-old, 10-year-old, 9-year-old, anyway,
Yeah.
young boy, and yet it's not that. It's how it's handled. It's just everything's coincidental and everything's a bit routine. George Lucas always had that documentary style to him. You know, we'll get loads and loads of coverage, fix it in the edit, and we'll let it roll. We'll let the cameras roll, get long shots,
Yeah.
and it never felt particularly focused.
Mm.
If you stop and think at any one point and you try and debate with yourself, what are we doing in this scene? It often takes a few minutes to work out why the characters are doing that, and that's a fundamental flaw in these kind of films, I think.
Yeah, it came across like when a really successful band split up, and they split up for about 10, 15, 20 years, and then they get back together again, and then they release an album which is mediocre. But then later on, they get their stride again, and about 2, 3 albums later, they're back to almost as good as they were. It felt like George Lucas was like, oh, he's out of practice, and it felt like he was referencing the original trilogy way too much and trying to throw in so many ideas, and hadn't really worked out how to make it a cohesive whole. That's one thing. There are also some story issues, like the C-3PO issue, which is when initially I found that offensive. I've gotten over it. It's fine. I blank it out. There are some story
It's very
issues.
big of you.
I agree with you, Gary. I don't think the premise of Anakin as a child is not interesting, because actually that could be quite rich. I think it's an interesting thing that he took on. He's basically making a tragedy, and I think it's interesting, quite brave of him. However, I totally agree. It's the handling, and I'm not so worried about his directing because he's a bit of hit or miss. I certainly feel that the stunted and stilted performances from a lot of the actors are his fault. He wrote it, he directed it, he's telling them what to do.
Yeah.
And so,
and I think that carries through particularly into Attack of the Clones,
yeah,
which has his easily worst dialogue and worst performances. He basically pushed Hayden Christensen away from the acting industry for a long time because of the reception he received to some extent. Natalie Portman, again, delivering a terrible performance. And you know that's not her because she's amazing in almost everything. Even Ewan McGregor given odd things to say and struggling to say them. And I think that's both a lack of interest in the actor's process, a sort of style he had in his head, as well as an insistence on putting everything in green screen, which I think leads to a disconnect in actors that they can't quite ground themselves in the scene.
Yeah, I think he has a bit of the Ridley Scott issue, which is particularly at the beginning of Ridley Scott's career. He's a visualist. He came from making commercials and adverts, which are visual, basically. There's no real narrative or dialogue going in adverts. And Ridley Scott is an amazing visualist. Not many are as good or better than him, but I know that in Alien and some of those early films, the actors were at wit's end trying to get Ridley to direct them. Paying them some attention would be nice. I mean, if you watch the making of Alien, Sigourney Weaver is like at her wit's end, like, why is this director not telling us what to do? And he subsequently said it's because he didn't really know, and he was more interested in the visual. And George Lucas definitely comes across as not either caring or understanding about how the actors should behave or what they should be saying.
Yeah, and that is true throughout the whole Star Wars prequel trilogy. Now, we've spent some time pulling those apart, which is one thing, but that is not the subject of our discussion today. I thought I'd go back into the archives, and talking with you, it became apparent that neither of us somehow, despite being Star Wars fans, had ever seen THX 1138.
Yeah.
Is that true?
No, never seen it.
Yeah, which is George Lucas made it as a student film when he was in film school, and then when he later got a budget, he remade it as a proper studio film. And so that's what we're going to watch now.
Cool.
Do you know anything about it? I have very little knowledge about it.
I know nothing about it other than I know what it looks like because some of the imagery is quite well known. And I know that it is sampled. It was sampled by Nine Inch Nails on.
Okay, not that's a good bit of trivia. I think it's in a dystopian future. Also, THX 1138 you will find littered throughout Lucas's and Spielberg to some extent film history. You will see references and hear references in the script to either THX or 1138. He recycles it over and over again. So there's a little Easter egg for you next time you're watching anything that George Lucas is connected to.
He also named his sound company after it, didn't he?
He did, of course, when you used to get the THX as you start watching.
Yeah, which Dr. Dre sampled.
One of those
Dr. Dre sampled, and he got taken to court because Lucasfilm were like, no, you're not having that.
Of course. Wonderful. Who copyrights? Wonderful, isn't it? Why don't I just play all the Disney films right now? Okay. Why don't we go and watch that film? You guys listen to a trailer for THX 1138 and we'll see you on the other side.
What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?
Are you now? Or have you ever been?
What's wrong?
1138, prefix THX.
Buy more now. Buy. And be happy.
Wanted to touch you so many times.
My mate has been acting very strange.
What's wrong?
Never mind. They're watching us now. I can feel it.
No one knows. No one can see us.
This is City Probe Scanner. We've run across some illegal sexual activity.
THX 1138.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that trailer for THX 1138. We've just watched the film itself, all 90 minutes of it. Jay, initial reactions for THX 1138?
Well, slightly baffling, but I enjoyed it. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And, you know, the name on the door says we watch bad films. I think let's be clear here. This isn't bad. And definitely if you were in the movie business in the early 70s and you watch this and you go, I think this guy knows what he's doing and he's one to watch because it's visually really, really interesting.
Yeah, there's a slight caveat though. I think we definitely watched the George Lucas 2004 fiddled with version. So neither of us have seen the original. So there are some scenes which look way too good for a low budget 70s film. So that adds to it. But I think generally speaking, it's still shot really well, interesting angles and stuff. I thought it was visually interesting.
Yeah, but I think even the scenes that have been treated, shall we say, in the 2004 re-release don't detract from the other things you can see that are clearly about framing choices, lighting choices, color palette choices that are all, I think, spot on and well and extremely consistent for the film.
Yeah, he's done a good one. He did well, our lad George. He's it's like, yeah, that was a
Well,
good film.
well,
It was.
before we get any further, let me just have a quick rundown of the plot.
Oh yeah, we might as well.
Yeah, I have to be honest, it's vaguely reminiscent of 1984. There's a futuristic totalitarian society. Everyone is called 3 letters and 4 numbers, hence THX 1138, which is Robert Duvall's character's name. He's our protagonist. He has a mundane life where he works at some sort of droid assembly factory during the day. He is fed drugs to keep him sedated and puppet-like. And he alternates between going to work and then going home, going to work and going home. He then doesn't have drugs for a short while. He loses his concentration at the factory, starts a relationship with a woman, and at that point he gets taken into a sort of cell area where he meets up with a couple of other people who are imprisoned. They concoct a plan to break out of this white prison, and the rest of the film is a long escape scene where they are escaping the totalitarian regime pursued by Terminator 2-esque figures with silver masks. Motorcycle chase and a car chase. He's ambushed by CGI monkeys, and eventually he breaks out onto the surface and is therefore free. So all of humanity has been kept underground all this time. That's largely the plot of it. Quite a simple plot, quite minimalist plot, but that suits the whole film. I think minimalist is a good way to describe the entire film.
Yeah, which is not something that George Lucas is known for, really.
It's not known for restraint, no.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this film. I don't know what I think about it because I think it's a good visual film. I agree that the plot is pretty thin, doesn't really matter. However, there were points where I was like, I don't really know what's going on, but I don't mind because it looks really cool. But there was definitely that section about 2/3 of the way through, which just it was the White Room section where we started talking about what we're going to
When
do
he's
next week.
imprisoned. When he's imprisoned, all of a sudden the film really grinds to a halt. We've had loads of really interesting visuals and very snappy editing. We commented several times how the editing was cut.
And
in a good way.
George Lucas did the editing himself. It said it specifically edited by George Lucas.
And Marcia Lucas, I should add. She also got an editing credit, who is often credited with saving Star Wars A New Hope in the edit. So yeah, good third, then the middle third, which is a long conversation, about 20 minutes with the prisoners, just and when I say a white room, I just mean a featureless white room. I commented it was like Mike TV's room in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, and they're all wearing white, and they've got shaved heads, and there's just a white room and white outfits and white dialogue, and it goes a bit sort of like repertory drama.
Yeah.
Improvised dialogue goes on way too long. Don't really know what's going on. Donald Pleasance goes a bit wonky.
When I first arrived here, I saw things as perhaps you do now. Yes, I was confused about my predicament. I longed to thrash out, to tear down, to destroy and annihilate, to ravage, wreak havoc and plunder.
Cut that bit out, and you've got a much better film. I would say.
Yeah.
Get out of that room quickly, and then it picks up again.
Yeah, I think actually you'd have a film that was quite well regarded and well recommended if you could chuck out that middle bit, and you'd actually make it quite a tense, exciting, futuristic thriller.
Yes.
We happened to mention in the intro, legitimately before we'd watched the film, that he was compatriot of Ridley Scott, and you could watch that and say there's definitely stuff in there that Ridley Scott saw and thought, I'm going to put that in Alien.
Yeah.
I think some of the computer screens and monitor.
The VHS monitor stuff. And also at the end, during the chase scene at the end, lots of shots of the cars chasing through city tunnels. There's a lot of that in Blade Runner as well.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of Blade Runner work, precursor in there. And it's all really good references. So Ridley Scott feels like he would have been a fan at some point. I also feel like George Lucas was a fan of that, because I think he took quite a lot of it, and there were bits that for Star Wars nerds like us we recognised in the original trilogy. There's the crackling noises over the intercoms sound just like the intercoms used by the X-wings in the Death Star trench run.
Yeah, I was.
Say about 20 guns.
Copying me. This is Menace, Submaster. Grid control. Have you got that flag yet? I read you very badly. I'll check the message.
Yes, I was wondering how deep you're going to go with this, but yes, I'm glad you went quite deep, and I'm glad. Exactly that, and also the editing at the end there was very reminiscent of the editing of the trench attack with the X-wing fighters on the Death Star. Some of the technology that they cut to, so some of the screens and some of the like bleeping lights and stuff, very Star Wars, almost exactly. And also a bit where his car overheats and he has to stop for a little bit, like Anakin Skywalker in the pod race.
This is true. this is true. And also the early scenes of the droids being assembled reminiscent of the clone factory on Camino from Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, I mean, basically a complete rip-off, but he's ripped off himself, so I think it's okay, generally speaking.
That's allowed, yeah. And a lot of the sound work is familiar to the point where I went to check, because Ben Burt is the mastermind behind the Star Wars sounds, which are so iconic. Lightsaber sounds, TIE fighter sounds, blaster sounds, doors, all this sort of thing. But actually, Ben Burt wasn't involved at this point, but there was Walter Murch, had a lot of roles on this film. Walter Murch went on to help through the Star Wars trilogy as well.
So Walter Murch actually co-wrote the script. Interesting.
Yeah, he had.
He also worked on The Godfather, and Robert Duvall, who stars in THX 1138, in the same year was in The Godfather, which was also by the American zoetrope friend of George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola. So it's all one little group.
It's all a big happy family. You know, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, firm friends throughout, definitely. Clearly helping each other out through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's come back to the looks of it again. There were lots of interesting choices. Right at the beginning, lots of framing shots where they're cutting off the forehead of the actors. You know, you could view that a number of ways. Are they being observed through like slits? Are they literally cutting their heads off, cutting out their brains because they don't need to use them in their work?
Oh,
Or did it just look nice?
Yes, I loved all that stuff. I thought it was really good. It was very photographic. I thought it was really well photographed. I don't know if George Lucas did his own cinematography, but some of the framing, like you were just saying, was brilliant. Some shots from sort of just below the actor looking up at their faces, and then shots from above looking down, and it would cut like that for a scene, a different placement of the camera in every little edit, and I just thought so imaginative and rich, and it was like.
Well, the cinematography was done jointly by Albert Kin and David Myers, both of whom are documentary makers. And that really has informed Lucas's style over the years. He loves the documentary style format. Big pulling back shots, lots of scenes overplaying, which he will then edit down, really capturing the moment.
Yeah, I was very, very impressed by it. It was very visually rich, and I kind of thought, what happened to George Lucas after this? Because let's face it, he's not known as being an amazing director with huge amounts of flair. And in fact, some of the things you could sort of criticize the prequel trilogy on is the sort of stagey cinematography where the camera is just static and it's just looking directly at people, wide shots, close-ups, wide shots. There's nothing particularly innovative going on, so I don't really know what happened. It's like he kind of forgot all the things he just learned at film school.
Well, I think you're being a little bit harsh. I think, you know, there are elements of definitely of that in A New Hope. Let's try and remember back to 77, how interesting the look of all of that is. He keeps a very black and white universe, but allows the color to shine through. He has a very famously lived-in universe. Spaceships don't look like they just rolled off the production line. They're dirty and they're scabby and they're crusty. You know, and there's so many shots in that where the Star Destroyer, the very, very first thing you see that comes over your head,
I was about to say,
really visually interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that is an amazing shot. It's a cinematically like legendary shot. This film, THX, has got a lot of life to it. I really like it for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of vitality going on and very kinetic editing, as we've said before. An area we haven't talked about, which was quite a surprise to us. Who did the music?
Oh, Lalo Schifrin.
Yeah. Famously, of course, did the Mission Impossible theme. his most famous work by far, and will be played at his funeral, no doubt. But
Well,
he
as
has
the
done
coffin
loads
goes
of
down,
bits and
brilliant.
pieces. And there'll be a ticker along the bottom where a fizzing fuse is going to go.
Yes, please. See that? Should you choose to accept?
I really hope he doesn't pass away before I publish this podcast. He's getting on a bit, so the odds aren't good. But moving on, it's Lalo Schifrin. It's going to be good, and indeed it is. It's minimalist like the rest of the film, but it's just punctuating and bubbling under the surface, cranking up the tension. It's good.
Lots of nice early 70s flute. The nothing says early 70s more than the flute, and underused these days, and it's great.
I don't know what more we can say about it. I mean, usually we're here pasting a film to death, but actually, there's a lot to enjoy here. I mean, let me sum it up with a question. Would you recommend people watch THX 1138?
Yeah, I would recommend them, but but also we have to be clear, it's not a George Lucas film in the way that we know George Lucas, which is a huge, big budget, family mainstream filmmaker. This is definitely not that. It is pretty avant-garde, pretty weird, and it's much. If you like Blade Runner, sort of the minimal storyline, really low-key acting, and very dystopian visuals, then you will probably like this. But if you like Star Wars, I don't know, but I would recommend it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, apart from the aforementioned middle section, which drags a bit, if you're looking at interesting visuals and a different way to look at a sci-fi film, I definitely picked up elements of the Andromeda Strain, another 70s sci-fi classic, which again is very interesting to watch. So if you're just looking for something like that, well worth a watch, and lots of interesting things to pick up on, I'd definitely give it a try.
I just want to say a couple of just to close up. I just do want to say a couple of extra things about George Lucas that I want to make clear to people listening. That George Lucas has created Star Wars, so therefore is basically is God to me. Okay, and I imagine to you, Gary, he's obviously a genius. Okay, I want to get that across. He's certainly a genius at creating memorable stories that have connected with millions of people throughout generations, and I'll always respect him for that. I just think he is not an amazing director or writer. So when we're talking about artists who make really amazing stuff and then make some dodgy stuff, and why do they do that? How do they do that? George Lucas is definitely in that same ballpark, and I think he can be a very frustrating director, filmmaker to follow. I do wish he'd make some more films. He kept saying when he was making the prequel trilogy, I just want to make some low budget films. He's produced one so far. He's produced one. He hasn't directed one. So I'd like some more films to critique of George Lucas, because he's only made a handful. So I'm
yeah, I totally agree, and it's not like he doesn't have now the budget to basically do whatever he wants.
All the time.
If he wants,
what's he doing?
All the time, yes. So he has the capacity to do whatever, and I'm sure he's a great world builder. He's a great ideas man. He's always needed someone to edit him. That's something he needs, and he needs someone to help him with the actors.
I think. Oh God, I was about to say. I think he needs a great director like Steven Spielberg again, and they should do a thing together. But I just forgot they did. It was awful. Well, I think they both probably could learn from the mistakes of that awful Indiana Jones film, which I shall not utter the name of, which, as far as I'm concerned, worse than any of the Star Wars prequel films. And it is a film that I've watched once and can never bring myself to watch ever again.
Ouch. You really don't like it, do you? You've mentioned it in another podcast.
I hate it. I think it's awful. And I hate it because not only was it George Lucas doing it, it was also Steven Spielberg working in tandem. And how those two, in their field, pretty amazing filmmakers made an appalling mess, such as that film, is beyond me. So I would be interested in those two rectifying the mistakes of the past. Yeah, I think George Lucas, he doesn't have enough people telling him no. He's got that sort of Paul McCartney, Ridley Scott syndrome. Like you said, no one to sort of edit him. Oh, George Lucas.
Georgie. Fair enough. Well, that was quite an epic rant there at the end for a film we liked. Well done.
Well, it's George Lucas. I'm going to save up some of my biggest rants for George, and he deserves it. But it's all from a place of love, George. Don't hate me, okay?
I'm sure he'll listen right to the end, so he won't too offended.
No, he'll listen to it. He'll do his own version of it. He'll just re-edit this for himself.
Yes. You are not wrong. Well, have you seen THX 1138? Do you enjoy it? Let us know. Get in touch with us on Twitter. We Watch Bad Films. Follow us on Instagram as well. We Watch Bad Films. If there's something you just want to say, drop us a line at wewatchbadfilms@gmail.com. But that's all for now. Thanks, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, and see you next time.